My name is Soha. I'm around 14 years old and I live in India. Three things you should know about me. I was and still am a very anxious and shy person. I prefer staying in my room than being out most of the time, and one of my favorite things to do is write on my laptop. I wish I could say that was all there is to me. No secrets, no deep hidden turmoil, no dark past. But I can't just do that, can I? Mental health has been a huge thing that I've been struggling with most of my life. Ever since I was a kid, I knew something was different. And other people, they would notice, but they never say anything. In fact, apart from my immediate family, only about three people know the real story. Today, we're going to be covering a few topics from what mental health means to me, my mental health journey, how I cope, and the stigma I face personally. Let's begin with the definition. What is mental health? Well, the meaning given by the internet is mental health is a level of psychological well being or the absence of mental illness. It is the psychological state of someone who is functioning at a satisfactory level of emotional behavioral adjustment. That's a clinical definition of mental health. Mental health means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Some people have never thought about it, while some people are obsessed over it, and some people, like myself, with this video, want to start a conversation about it. To me personally, mental health is something related to who you are as an individual, the way you were raised, the way you were born, the environment that you lived in. For example, let me just share an example with you from my real life. There was a time in my life where I was stuck in between two houses. I had some stuff in one house, some of my stuff in the other house. If something bad would happen in one house, I'd go to the other house. It sounds like a sketchy situation, but at that time, that was the environment I lived in. When something like that happens and you're a child who doesn't understand much about what current circumstances are, you begin to feel unsettled, and that is something that can lead to further issues along the line. But before I get ahead of myself, let's move on to something I wanted to share, my mental health journey. Let's begin with my current diagnosis. As of now, I've been diagnosed with PDD, a form of depression, and I've also been diagnosed with anxiety. I'm not diagnosed with any form of medication at this part of my life. I started being curious about all this and my mental health at the age of 12 in the seventh grade. Sixth grade was a grade when I was a not so honest person. I lied to a lot of people about myself in general. I was dealing with a lot of bullshit at home, and although that's not an excuse, lying was the only coping mechanism I had. Something that you should understand is that my last experience with a therapist wasn't very pleasant. I won't go into detail because that's not what this video is about. But before I had reached out to get help and I was left with nothing but dejection. But so when my mom took me to a new therapist, I was very cautious at first. But eventually I grew very near and dear to this therapist. I've been seeing her for about 2 or 3 years now. It's something that I have has helped me and something I've chosen over medication. I took a small dose of medication at the beginning and I found that medication doesn't agree with me for the most part. For other individuals, meds do help, but that was not the case for me. So instead of taking medication, I opted for a lot of therapy and coping mechanisms instead. Now, I want to talk about my current specific diagnosis. Let's start with my PDD. PDD stands for persistent depressive disorder. Many call this high functioning depression, but I prefer not to categorize things as high functioning and low functioning. Because of this high functioning, low functioning categorization, I prefer to call my diagnosis as PDD. It is not as serious as clinical depression, but it is still a serious mental health disorder that needs to be addressed. Persistent depressive disorder, as defined by the Mayo Clinic, is a continuous long-term form of depression. You may lose interest in normal daily activities, feel hopeless, lack productivity, and have a low self-esteem and an overall feeling of inadequacy. You may think that a lot of this is the same as clinical depression, but this is where you're wrong. Clinical depression is when your whole life gets disrupted by it. Literally, if you don't do anything about this, you can't carry on with the normal daily tasks of your life. But PDD is different. Survivors with PDD are able to cope more. For me personally, when I was going through a particular bad time, I distanced myself from everyone and pretend I'm fine. And let me tell you, takes a toll on you. My anxiety is something that has always been a part of my life and will always be a part of my life, but I can control it and doesn't completely take over my life. That's how I have anxiety, but it's not an anxiety disorder. Of course, there are days which are worse than others, but all in all, my anxiety can be controlled. Of course, there are many other mental illnesses that exist that I have never suffered from, including bipolar disorder, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, and so on and so forth. So, the last thing I'm going to talk about before I finish this video off is the stigma around mental illnesses and mental health in India specifically. There was once a talk about mental health in my school. I personally thought it was great, and as someone who suffers from mental health issues, it was great to see someone willing to start a conversation about them. But honestly, no one gave two shits about this conversation that we were having. When I asked a few people who didn't like the talk, they said that it wasn't relevant and that depression was just feeling sad and anxiety was just being nervous. Let me get one thing across. Depression is not just a feeling of sadness and remorse. It is the unchanging feeling of being lost or disconnected. And when it interferes with your life, it ruins the quality of your life. Same with anxiety. It's not just being nervous or tense. It's a paranoid feeling of something bad is going to happen to me all the time. Stigma and this makes me, especially within what's supposed to be the next generation, makes me feel really uncomfortable. Because I know for a fact that I'm the only one. I'm just the only one who's come to terms with it and speaking about it. Some people know it's really difficult for me to handle all of this, and I'd like to thank all the people who have dealt with my issues over the years and helped me. I'll put a couple of links down in the description, websites I've researched on, videos that have resonated with me, etc. I'll also put a few hotline numbers for anyone who needs help or support. So yeah, I think this video for my first like analytic video, I think it's pretty good. Yeah, so that was the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it interesting, or maybe I just broadened your view on something. So yeah, anyway, I'll see you later.